This section is going to look at how you use factoring to solve quadratic equations. This first example shows an equation that is already factored and is equal to 0. Now, in order to solve this equation, you need to look at the two factors that are given, and you need to make each of these factors equal to 0, because the only way you can multiply to get something equal to 0 is if one of the factors is 0. So first part of our question, we've got x plus 2. In order to make that equal to 0, we're going to take 2 away from both sides, and we get x equals negative 2. Now, you may have been able to do that in your head. Look at the equation and go, you're going to need to put a negative 2 in to make it equal to 0. Similarly, on the other side, we've got x plus 5 equals 0. In order to make this term equal to 0, we're going to take away 5 from both sides, and we get x equals negative 5. So the solution to this equation, the only way to make this equation equal to 0, is if x is equal to negative 2 or x is equal to negative 5. If the question isn't factored, we're going to have to factor it. So in order to factor this equation, we're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to give us negative 8 and add to give us negative 2. Those numbers are, of course, negative 4 and positive 2. So negative 4 times 2 is going to give us negative 8. Negative 4 plus 2 is going to give us negative 2. When we factor this, we're going to get x minus 4 and x plus 2 equals 0. So we've taken our equation and we've factored it. Now, in order to make this equal to 0, we have to make each of the factors equal to 0. So one solution here, 4 minus 4 is going to be 0, so x would be equal to negative 4. Another possibility is if this term is 0, so we would have negative 2 plus 2 is equal to 0, so x is equal to negative 2. So the possible solutions of this quadratic equation are x is positive 4 and x is negative 2. Another type of factoring, if you look at this equation, we've got x squared minus x. Now this is not a difference of squares because this x term is not a perfect square. So the only kind of factoring we can do here is to factor out a common term. I can divide an x out of both, so I'm going to divide an x out of x squared and get x. I'm going to divide an x out of 9x and get 9. Because that equals to 0, the only way to make this x in the front equal to 0 is to actually have it equal to 0. So one of our solutions for this is going to be x equals 0. The second solution is going to be the solution that makes our second term equal to 0. And since we know 9 minus 9 equals 0, our second solution is going to be positive 9. So our two solutions to the equation x squared minus 9x are 0 and also positive 9. Here's a more challenging one. We're going to have to factor this by decomposition. So I'm looking for two numbers to multiply to get negative 30 because I have to multiply the a and the c term, the 5 and the negative 6 together. I'm looking for those same two numbers that are going to add to give me positive 7. Those numbers are, of course, positive 10 and negative 3. Positive 10 times negative 3 gives me negative 30. Positive 10 plus negative 3 gives me 7. So factoring by decomposition, I'm going to take my 10x and my negative 3x, and I'm going to replace it for the 7x that was there. Now I'm going to factor a term out of the first two, and I get 5x, which is going to leave me with x plus 2. Out of the second one, I'm going to factor out a negative 3, and that's going to leave me with x plus 2 equals 0. Now factoring out the common x plus 2, I'm left with the remaining term, which is 5x plus 3 equals 0. In order to make this equation equal to 0, I have to make both terms equal to 0. The first one is going to be x equals 2. The second one, if I have 5x minus 3 equals 0, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get 5x equals 3, which results in x equals positive 3 over 5. So my two solutions are x is negative 2 and x is positive 3 over 5. Finally, here's an equation that is not equal to 0. I can still solve this equation. I just have to take everything that's on one of the sides of the equation and move it over to make the equation equal to 0. So I'm going to add 5x to both sides, and I get 2x squared plus 5x equals 3. Now I'm going to subtract 3 to make that side equal to 0, and I've got 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. Now factoring by decomposition, I'm looking for two numbers to multiply to give me negative 6, because 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, and add to give me positive 5. Now those numbers are, of course, positive 6 and negative 1. So I'm going to break apart my 5x. I get 2x squared plus 6x minus x, and you could put the 1x if you wanted to, minus 3 equals 0. Then I'm going to factor out something out of each of my two sides. I've got 2x on this side, which is going to leave me with x plus 3. On this side, I want to get rid of these negatives, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1. And I'm left with x plus 3, and it's still all equal to 0. Factoring out the x plus 3, I'm left with 2x minus 1, which means the x term from this side is going to be negative 3. The x term from this side is going to be positive 1 over positive 2.